Hi, it's Dr. Steve from Misericordia University. Let's continue our examination of student-centered methods of teaching and learning in today's class by considering discovery and inquiry learning. While the terms inquiry teaching and discovery learning are sometimes used synonymously by different teachers, they are essentially the same, but there are some technical differences. First of all, they're the same in the sense that both methods are based on the assumption that learners would like to be active knowledge seekers. So it's activity, it's part of an active classroom versus direct instruction and lecture. And also, both methods are based in problem solving. When we talk about problem solving, we're talking about the following steps. That a problem has to be defined, and then we determine a desired outcome to satisfy that problem or to address it. And then students select possible solutions, they test solutions, and they evaluate the outcomes. And depending on the task and the way it's set up by the teacher, it's possible that students may revise and then go back up and test some more solutions. So that's basically problem solving, and inquiry teaching and discovery learning are both based in that. The technical difference between inquiry and discovery is determined by who defines the problem, the process, and also the solution. In both inquiry teaching and discovery learning, the student defines the solution, and that's the purpose of the exercise. But in terms of the difference between inquiry and discovery, who is going to define the problem and the process as well as the solution? So if we look at the high end, on the pure side of it, so to speak, on the high end, to qualify as discovery learning technically, the student would actually define the problem and the process and also the solution. Now on the low end, which low does not suggest anything of lesser quality, just something that's a little more efficient in terms of time with learning. This whole activity could take a little bit less time. The student will, of course, define the solution, but the problem may be defined by the teacher or some scenario provided in a textbook or some online source. The process may be also determined by the teacher or the textbook or that online source. And also we have some variations of that where maybe the teacher, which is probably the more practical side, is that the teacher determines the problem, the student determines the solution, and maybe the process itself is also determined by the student. Let's just shed a little more light on this distinction between the two. Let's turn to Marzano. Marzano suggests that unassisted discovery learning involves students being presented with a situation and they have to kind of do everything on their own, and they receive very little, if any, assistance. Now, in the enhanced discovery learning, which is also known as inquiry teaching, teachers may ask students to design the experiment, invent their own strategy, answer some guiding questions, and then address the possible solution. Marzano culminates by saying that unassisted discovery learning can be perilous to student learning, but if it's enhanced learning, in other words, where the teacher is providing some guidance, this can be very useful in instruction. Marzano goes on to describe what he calls enhanced discovery learning, in which the teacher prepares students for the discovery learning activity and provides a lot of assistance along the way. In the process, teachers make sure the students have all the necessary knowledge and all the background that they need, which might include some direct instruction, some lecture along the way. So as an example, Marzano says, if we were to ask students to consider how best to stretch the hamstring muscle in cold weather to warm up before exercise activity, the teacher might present a series of lessons that clarify some basic facts about muscles the reaction to changes in temperature. So there may be some lecture involved, provide some resources, and then the teacher will provide the scenario, and then the students would consider the problem-solving aspect and generate some possible solutions. I presented the technical differences between these different terms, not to confuse, but rather to point out that several of these terms are used synonymously, and it's helpful for teachers to know that there are slight differences between the different terms. Ultimately, whatever this method of teaching is referred to as, they all involve the same thing, ultimately. We want students to use their skills to address real-world types of problems. Along the way, we want them to develop confidence in their ability to address and solve problems. And in the real world, adults know that there is no right or wrong answer to real-life problems, and we want the students to realize that and to realize the tentativeness of their answers to real-life problems. One high-tech solution is a site called emissions.net. And what these folks do is they offer live discovery learning simulations. These simulations can take place as part of a whole class, or maybe get several classes together to form a larger team of people. Ultimately, all of these tasks end up being approximately a 2-hour video conference for the live portion. But they do provide lesson plans for advanced work to prepare students to participate in the experience, to review the prerequisite knowledge and skills. And then ultimately, on the day of the emission, the students will function together as an emergency response team, and they will break into smaller groups who will satisfy different and address different particular tasks in a real-world type scenario. And in this process, they will be incorporating skills in different areas. And they could be math, could be the sciences, language arts, history, or some combination thereof. The last time that I saw the cost, it was about $500 for the entire mission, which, when you look at it from a school perspective, that's not a lot of money to host something for several classes and to get so much out of it. eMissions provides a whole slew of possible scenarios that a school can purchase for its students to participate in. And the other thing I like about eMissions is that the scenarios, while many websites and many companies will provide things more for the younger students, you notice there are a lot of mid-level, and there are some high school missions available on this site as well. One in which I participated in is called Operation Montserrat. There's also Hurricane Alert, one that is actually very timely for the things that are happening in our current state of emergency in this country as of the recording of this video, and that is the cyber surgeons. And what's interesting in that scenario, and it's grades 9 through 12, is that they're asking students to incorporate health science and anatomy and physiology skills. And there's an emergency, there's an outbreak of something, some health emergency in Africa, and according to this scenario, it's a made-up scenario, and the students are going to participate on a comfort ship that's going to travel down the Nile and try to address some of the health concerns there, which includes diagnosing them, determining the problems that are happening, and try to address some possible solutions. So again, they're real-world types of scenarios, even though they are fictional. When I had the opportunity to participate in the emission called Operation Montserrat, it was a 2-hour video conference, and all the participants in the room, we formed an emergency response team. And our purpose, our whole task, overall task, was to determine if and when residents in this particular area, and again, it's a fictional story, but it's based on an actual area in the world, and determine if and when residents in that area, and they were living right by a volcano, should they be evacuated to avoid a volcanic eruption. Now, a lot of things have to be taken in consideration. How do you know if the volcano is set to erupt or not, or likely to erupt? And we also looked at hurricane data sent from a simulated space shuttle mission. And it was very exciting because we had the feeling that the space shuttle was just launched, and now they were up in space, orbiting around the world, and they were gathering data in which they were going to send down to this emergency response team. And then we broke into smaller groups, and each group was handling some part of the emergency response. So, for example, we had some people who were doing some of the technical calculations. We had people working with math, people working with science. But we also had a marketing group who would see how are we going to publicize and get the word out and communicate appropriately and effectively to the residents of that area. One thing that added a little extra interest, at times an emergency bulletin would arrive saying something to the effect that, oh, there's a, something has occurred in terms of weather phenomenon, and now that's going to speed up what we have to do, or kind of makes things a little more urgent. So those emergency bulletins just were timely, and they just added extra little interest in there and made it more of a game situation. I can report to you that it was fun, it was engaging, it was intense, but in a relaxed way. Everybody was engaged and fully participating in these activities. It was a really, really positive experience. On Blackboard, I will post some links to eMissions, and also I'm going to post a link to a video provided by eMissions, and it shows a middle level class participating in one of these scenarios. It's just interesting to gauge their reactions and their response. You can see that everybody gets involved, everybody gets fully engaged, and gets very engrossed in the whole activity. To experience discovery learning inquiry teaching, let's consider a scenario in which a ship that could be similar to the Mayflower, and around that time frame, has to determine where to land in this new land and build and establish a colony. On Blackboard, start by reading the scenario that's been provided. Choose where you feel would be the best place to establish a colony. Now, on the map provided, you'll find several lettered areas. Now, you can either choose one of those lettered areas, or you can select another area that's not specifically indicated, and you could just describe where that is. On the discussion board, we'd like you to describe where you would like to build a colony and why. Now, ideally, this is designed so that we can, just like with the eMissions, that we could do this face-to-face with a group of learners. But in this case, we're going to take on the challenge of doing this individually, and we can discuss this on our discussion board. So when I say select where you feel and why, and post that to the discussion board, ultimately let's read those and let's see if we can come to some type of consensus, because that would be the ultimate outcome from this discovery learning inquiry teaching activity. Enjoy the activity, have fun, and I look forward to seeing you at our next virtual class.